All right, looks like everybody's starting to join us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to give just another minute or so. I know the wonderful Hadley is letting everyone in, and we're going to get started in just a moment. It's good to see you all here. It's already 6:02. I don't know, Alyssa, where you are, but it's like pitch black outside my window.
Oh yeah, I'm in Redlands. I live in Southern California too. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
it's just right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like I pick up the kids from school and it's nighttime.
right. By the time you get home, it's exactly the way it is. I feel that way too. I know, but at least, I don't know, it's fall, which always makes me happy.
Me too. I'm from Boston originally, so it sort of feels a little bit more like home now when it's, well, I don't know. At 5 in the morning it does when it's 52 degrees, and then by like 3 in the afternoon it's 80 here in
Yeah.
Redlands. And I'm like, I'm wearing a sweatshirt and then I'm just taking clothes off all
Yep.
day.
Layers, all about layers.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, let's get started. It's 6:02. I know we've got a lot to cover today. Just wanted to say hello and to welcome everyone. My name is Kate Dworkowski, and I am the Director of Admissions at the John Thomas Dye School in Los Angeles. And I'm also on the steering committee of LAIS. LAIS, as you may or may not know, is a consortium of independent schools in and around Los Angeles. There's about 60 of us all together. Every independent school is different and unique. And as you've been going through this process for your family, I'm sure you're picking up on all those nuances. And yet, for all the differences that we have in terms of our curriculum and our pedagogy and campuses, we all share the same commitment to representing socioeconomic diversity that really is present in and around Los Angeles. So having that lovely cross section. Financial assistance, tuition assistance, all of those pieces are so important to each and every one of our schools. And we're so very lucky to have Alisa Evans with us tonight. Alisa is might be new to some of you, but she is not new to the world of independent school financial assistance and definitely not new to LAAS. Alisa has been presenting and working with LAAS and schools nationwide, not just here in California, for I think it's just over 25 years or so. So she has a lot of experience in this area. Alisa is also the founder of Mission Enrollment, and she is, in addition to that, the mother of two children who are also in independent schools. So she approaches this from so many different perspectives. So we're so glad to have you back with us once again, Alisa, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us.
Thank you, Kate, and Kate, thank you, Hallie, and thank you to LAIS for hosting this. I work with, like you said, schools all over the country, and the one thing that I think is so cool and unique about your region is that you guys do a lot of collaboration together, supporting families, and it's basically having you guys come together has one space, a central place for families to go and get a lot of information because individually having to run to all the websites, all the schools, so hosting we started doing the financial aid nights a couple of years ago and offering it to all the LAIS school folks to say, hey, listen, send folks to us and we'll talk through how this process goes. It's not like you can do YouTube videos or TikToks about how to do this thing called financial aid in the K through 12 world. So I so appreciate your consortium coming together and saying, how can we make this open, accessible, and clear for families so that they know what does the admissions process look like, and then what does the financial aid process look like for families that just this is not something that was on their radar maybe before and now it is, and it's like going from not paying a tuition to paying tuition, and you're like, wow, this is an adjustment for a family, and you guys offering them the space to come in. So I so appreciate you all offering this to all of your collective families. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and then we'll get right into it. Give me 1 second. All right, and then I'm going to give you all some sort of play-by-play of the evening. All right, so first what we're going to do here, I've got my PowerPoint up. We're going to talk through all the kind of navigating this process of financial aid for the K through 12 world. Couple of things. You are on a Zoom webinar, which is great. It's anonymous, so nobody's going to know that you're here and you're listening and you're part of this, which is great. Gives you that privacy. If you have questions as we are going through this, please feel free to write those questions in the Q&A. Your information, again, is anonymous. Only myself and the panelists here can see the information. And I already told the team, if we're navigating through this and it's an important question that we feel like is important to talk about right on the slide that we're on, then we're going to stop, have them ask me the question, and we'll talk through it. But I want you to know that we're saving time at the end to answer as many questions as we can get through. I know this is a quick turnaround and it's, just an hour of your time. We're going to be doing speed dating for financial aid. And so we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. I also know, as a parent of two kids, this is in between like dinner, tubby time for some people and homework and all that stuff. And so we know you need to get back to doing the things you need to do for work, for your family. And so even taking this time tonight, we so appreciate, because we know there's just a lot that's happening in your household. So we're going to try to get through this as quickly as possible, but just know if you have questions, go ahead and ask them here, and then we'll answer as many as possible at the end.
Alyssa,
All
I'm
right.
so sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting, but one thing that I neglected to mention, and we'll put the link in just a second, is that we are also offering for anybody who would like a Spanish translation option in real time. We're going to
Oh,
drop that
great.
link into the chat in
Yes.
just a moment. And so please do use that as well.
Oh, yes, that was the other thing I was gonna say. You guys have made this really accessible for all families that this is could be challenging. So having that, yeah, if anybody needs the Spanish translation, I think it's in their bar. The one thing of COVID, everybody learned how to use Zoom. And so that is down the bottom for you all to check. So we'll give folks a minute to get there, and I'll just kind of go through our agenda for tonight. So we're going to talk through the K through 12 financial aid process. There are terms that we use that sound similar to what happens in higher education. So we're going to just kind of give some updates on what are the differences between those two things. I put in here about your family budget. For those of you that this is more of a refresher, that you've completed a financial aid form before, but it's something you do once a year, so it's not something that you're doing every month. So everybody has a little bit of amnesia about doing financial aid applications. And so we're going to talk about that. But doing your household budget. I've had kids. My kids are now 10 and 12, and we've been in independent schools since they were 18 months. And so doing that family budget each and every year really helps us to plan and understand where our money is heading. But there's also sort of an advantage of doing a family budget as you're getting ready to fill out these forms. Even if you've done it previously, a lot of the questions that you're going to need to answer are actually questions that you can only answer if you've done a budget. Say, yeah, how much are we spending on groceries, on gas, on these different things? In times of inflation, a lot of the things that we've been spending there's a lot more cost associated with the kind of average expenses that we have. The numbers matter because this is a mathematical equation at the end of the day. So the more accurate or good on your estimates you can be now will help the schools on the back end to do their job. So this is very much a partnership. So kind of getting your data in and all of your kind of ducks in a row now is going to help you to complete the form. But it's also just a good process to go through each year to say, yeah, what can we contribute to private school? Like, what is available of our budget? What's left over to be able to contribute to non-public education? So I throw in actually my own family budget and some kind of tips that we've done over the years. I'm going to give you the timeline of financial aid, and I'm going to talk a little bit more deeply about tax documents, common forms you're going to be asked to gather, what to look for on those tax forms. And then at the end, we'll have some frequently asked questions. And because my company, what we do for schools, essentially schools have us review the financial aid folders, we gather all the tax documents. We look at about 17,000 applications a year, and there are common mistakes that families make. And so we want to do everything to help kind of have you avoid that the common mistakes that families will make. And really my goals, every time I talk to parents, I want to have really three goals for you for tonight. One, I want you to have a sense of calmness about this process. There is nothing more stressful than talking about our children and our finances. And we're essentially asking you to do both of those things during this time frame. And so I want you to walk away with a sense of calmness about this process, knowing that it's just a process that you have to go through. I want you to walk away with a sense of clarity about what is that? What do I need to have in front of me? What questions are important? How do you even come up with a calculation? What is an award? What is it? How does it render? So I want you to have that sense of clarity about what exactly you're getting into here. And then lastly, I want you to walk away with a sense of confidence, not just a sense of confidence about how to fill out an online form. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an online form and it requires tax documents. Many of you that have gotten a mortgage have gone through that process as well, or filled out something online. I want you to have confidence, and this is really speaking from the parent's perspective, that you are making an investment in your child's education, that you're, even showing up here tonight, I don't care if you're making, $50,000 to $500,000. This is a sacrifice that you're making. You're choosing to spend your money on this instead of potentially something else. And so it's not lost on me that this is something that is a commitment. It's not a short-term commitment. We are not talking about something that's 1 or 2 years. You're talking about making a commitment to spend money on education from potentially 18 months, depending on what your school starts, all the way through the end of high school, and then you still have college to consider. So one of the things I want you to know is I did work at the National Association of Independent Schools for many years, and there was lots of research that supports this choice that you're considering, independent education. Your children will be in a better position, not just if they decide to go off to college, they're going to be better prepared. They're going to have a sense of worldliness. They're going to be global citizens. They're going to be doing great work. All the schools in Los Angeles offer amazing opportunities for children, all sorts of different types of learning mechanisms. Whether they go off to the Peace Corps or they decide they want to be an entrepreneur, they're going to be well equipped. But the one thing you're not going to get anytime soon is a thank you. Your children, I'm still waiting for it. It hasn't happened yet. Your children are likely not to thank you for making this sacrifice each and every year. So I always want to tell you from a parent's perspective, and then on behalf of your children, thank you for showing up, for even considering independent education for your kids, and for the sacrifices that you're going to be making over the next umpteen years of doing this process. So we so appreciate you and what you're doing here. So again, it's not about it's not lost on any of the schools that what you're doing is deliberate, it's intentional, and that we want to make sure that we're great partners in that. And so the schools are part of the partnership, and the parents are part of the partnership. And so they need information from you, and then they're going to do their part to make sure that you all come together and come to a good place. So let's dive into the financial aid piece here. So, many of us that, if you went off to college and your parents may have filled out the FAFSA, or you might even have kids heading off to college now and you're filling out the FAFSA, and there are similarities in the application. However, there are some very unique differences in how financial aid is rendered for college than for the K-12 world. You will find that there's a lot more questions on the financial aid forms that we need because the kids are still living at home. And this is something that you're managing the daily life of a household, whereas your kids are going off to college, you're going to get packaged with loans and work study and different things that are going to be different. Whereas in our world, the financial aid that we're talking about tonight is need-based financial aid. What does that mean? So essentially, every school has a tuition minus what a parent can afford to pay, how much they can contribute to their child's education for that year. That gap between the tuition and what a family can afford to pay is filled with a financial aid award. So we're filling the gap of what the tuition is and what you can, as a parent, can afford to pay. And that is the grant that you're getting, or the financial aid award that you get, is to fill that gap. It is not funded by the federal government. Every school has their own financial aid program. So it's not a universal thing. And so because of that, it's independent of any federal funding, and it's coming from a school's budget. A lot of times it's even from their operating budget, but sometimes it's from endowments, but it's all essentially funded from within. So what makes independent schools so amazing is sort of an all for one and one for all. And a lot of the monies that are used for financial aid were fundraised in years before by other families. And so it's a program that is perpetuated by annual giving and supporting the school. So donors will give to the community. And the reason I give you that level of detail is when your kids do go off into the world, they become these amazing humans doing wonderful things, and they're ready to be philanthropic and give back to their community. The way to do that would be to give to the independent school that your children went to and have them give back to that program. And it helps to fund the financial aid programs for years to come. And so the children that come after them can have the same opportunities that your children will have. And it's not a loan. It's not something that you're required to pay back. And so it does need that funding to come, but it can be perpetuated through fundraising over the years. So where do we go to do our, to navigate? Now, as you're thinking about, if you're a new family and you're thinking about 3 or 4 different schools that your kids are looking at, I would just grab a piece of paper, as simply as that is, kids' names, schools you're considering. And when I said that it is not universal, that is absolutely a fact. So, in higher ed, everybody fills out the FAFSA and they fill out the profile. In the K through 12 world, there are at least 5 different financial aid platforms that schools can use. They're not very different as far as the process. It's just a matter of preference. Sometimes it's because the school is using that system. So for example, if they're using FACS for their billing and tuition solution, they might use their financial aid solution because it's just easier. They all do the same thing. They're all assessing a family's ability to pay. So when you are looking at what schools you're considering, the good news is though, is every school is sort of, set up the same way. You go to the admissions tab on the school's website. You go to where it says either tuition and fees, affordability, affording XYZ school. Wherever tuition is, you're going to likely see very quickly or adjacent to that what they're doing for financial aid. So here are the things you need to pay attention to. So go get the kids listed, what schools you're considering, and what you need to find out. What platform are they using? It could be Blackbaud, Clarity, FACS, FAST, SSS, TADS. What platform are they using? What is the process? Meaning, what is the timeline? What are the deadline dates? Because again, that's not universal for every school. And what are the documents that they require for you to upload? What is the process for that school? Could be different than another school. So when you do your little matrix of the kids and the schools that you're considering, if 3 of the schools that you're considering all use Clarity, great news. You're just filling out Clarity one time. So with all of these platforms, you are filling out the file one time for your family and all your children, and then you're telling what school you want it to be sent to. So you might luck out, and all of the schools that you're considering are all using Clarity, for example. Great, perfect. You just need to fill out the Clarity application once, and then you're going to send it to all the schools that you're considering. If you have kids in lower school and kids in upper school, and the lower school kids are using Clarity, and then the upper school, they're looking at a school that uses FACS, then you're going to have to fill out 2 applications. So give yourself time to do that research and know how many times you're going to have to fill out a financial aid application. And the good news is the questions are similar. You're going to have similar document requirements. So it's not like it's going to be a totally different thing, but do that exercise, because what you don't want to do is miss a deadline or miss something because the first school that you went to, the deadline was, January 5th, and the other school, it was December 31. You don't want to miss deadlines. Deadlines are critically important for independent schools. So do that research early and get that kind of dialed in. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is, what is the tuition for the schools that you're considering? What are the fees? Are there any additional fees you need to be aware of? Are there any trips that might be coming up? So as you start to think about getting your budgets pulled together, are there any tests that have to take place? So or if you have a school that has uniforms, what is the cost of uniforms? As you start to build out your budget, there are going to be supplemental costs to independent school that the school may or may not provide additional resources and support for, but knowing what those costs are will help you to know the schools you're considering, sort of the total cost of enrollment.
Alyssa, can I interrupt you just because a few questions have popped up and I think you might be getting to it, but just to put it on your radar,
Yeah.
just questions around as you're building out your budget and thinking about what you realistically can afford, what does that look like? That question I think always often trips people up, right? Like, is it okay to put 0 so that you can start to build your family savings? Is it okay to like how realistic should you be in that question? I'm just trying to summarize a few of them here.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So this is why I added the family budget piece, because if I were to ask you today, well, how much can you afford for independent school? You're like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. If you're new to the process, you probably haven't done a big, I mean, everybody knows how to do a budget, but how many people are kind of doing that exercise in preparation for a big expense? I'm not sure, but it's really important to do a budget first before you ever get to the question that says, how much do you think you can afford to pay? Because you really can't answer that question until you've done a budget. Because the answer could be, I actually don't have really much left over. I would say it's never going to be appropriate to put 0, just generally, because everybody kind of has to bring something to the table, and it needs to be realistic for your family. And so I wouldn't ever put 0. You want to put we would say some skin in the game. You have to this is the partnership piece. We want you to feel invested in this process as well, and you contribute what you think you can contribute. And if that's very low, or it's $100 or $500, some schools require a minimum payment. So some schools, it might be that that everybody has to pay a minimum of $1,000. It's not, that's also not universal, but you always want to do this exercise first. You can't just throw a number out there and say, I think I can do this. But you did mention something about savings, like, well, should they be stopping their retirement? Should they stop putting money in retirement and not have any money in savings and, stop going on vacation? Absolutely not. You want to still also be living your life and doing the normal things that you do at a normal rate, at an average rate. Nobody is suggesting that you stop living your life to send your kid to private school. We're asking you to kind of be realistic, spend the average expenses. And then one of those expenses, and that's how the calculation is built, which we're going to talk about in a minute, includes a percentage of your kind of leftover monies goes to independent education. So it is kind of baked into the algorithm that nobody's sort of saying, your income minus your expenses and everything that's left over has to go to private school. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. But let's go into the budget piece. Does that kind of help us to go to the next slide? Do you feel like that answers?
I think so. And for those people on the call who ask the questions, please chime in and if you
Yeah.
have, more specifics.
Yep. And again, we're gonna have time at the end to talk, because the question we always get from families is, what if I make too much money? That's actually it's like an impossible question. Like, what is it that I have to make to be able to get some financial aid? The question is, it's so much that it depends. It depends on how many children are in the household. It depends on, are you caring for elderly parents? While you are a mathematical equation, you are also humans, and so there's a lot that goes into these algorithms that account for lots of things. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but how much do I have to make to be able to? Just depends on what you need. If you don't need financial aid, if you think you can afford to pay full price, then you shouldn't be applying for financial aid. If you don't think you can afford to pay full price, not just for this year, but as along the next 8 to 10 years, then you should apply for financial aid. And if the system says, no, you really should be a full pay, then you can kind of work through that. But if you can afford to pay it, then you likely shouldn't be applying. If you can't afford it and you don't apply because somehow you fear that if I apply for financial aid, somehow that will impact your admissions, which it will not, then how are you going to pay for it if you don't have the money to pay for it, right? So there is no advantage to not applying if you feel like you need it, and there is no disadvantage to applying and going through that process, because if you feel like you can't afford it, then that's where you're at, right? So it's worth it to go through the exercise. And when you come through and you do your budget and you come to the place that says, yep, I really feel like I can contribute a couple $1,000, or whatever it might be for you and your family, then you've done that work. And that's the data that you're going to be putting into the calculation, into the application anyway. So doing this budget is really important. So doing the budget, I take 2 months of bank statements very simply, and I categorize housing, clothing, food, and utilities, kids' needs. I have a son that plays hockey, so the sports fees, there's different fees there. And then I put in, tuition, uniforms, any of those things. You might have kids heading off to college, so there might be, test prep that you have to do, admissions fees for college, all that stuff. Pulling that together to come up with what are the answers to these questions, and then baking that into a budget. And I use 2 months because I want to use some averages. Things you want to be paying attention to. Tuition is only covering you from essentially, the academic year. Those of you that have young children, you still have summer costs. Don't forget about summer. You've got summer school or summer camps and programs, after school care. A lot of us that go in back to work after COVID, you needed, childcare in the afternoon. That's become very expensive. And so making sure you identify all those expenses, because there are questions on these applications that say, do you have any other expenses that haven't been identified here? So making sure you come up with that. If you're caring for grandma and grandpa, making sure you're identifying what those costs are. So we know that there are, lots of things that people are having to spend their money on, but making sure you do a good estimate is going to be critically important. So this was actually my budget from about a year and a half ago, where I had this like unrealistic hope about what I was spending my money on for groceries. And, I was introduced to the land of Instacart and DoorDash, and I was like, this is a magical tool. It's an expensive magical tool not to have to go to the grocery store with 2 children. But not realizing what I was really spending monthly was, and if I had filled out my form, I would have been pretty sizably off on what I think I was spending, what I was actually spending. So I want to make sure you guys do that exercise so that you get a good sense of where your budget is at. And are there ways you can cut expenses that are maybe extras that are not reasonable? But nobody is sort of suggesting that you stop, doing the things that you would normally do to, we want this to be affordable. We're not talking about making it that, everybody's going to sacrifice down to never going on a vacation again until their kid gets out of college. So it's a balance. It's really truly a balance. So here's the just kind of some examples of a website details for you. So when you go to a school's website, you'll see the link to click on and the deadline dates. And then usually they have some like FAQ, frequently asked questions, or what's the process, what's the documents, and the deadline. So just to give you a kind of a layout of what that looks like. So as you start to click on those websites for all the schools you're considering, they will almost always have a link to the financial aid platform they're using, and they'll always be giving you sort of the deadline dates and any additional details that you need to know. Okay, so this sense of calm, do the budget first. There's this cool website. I don't use it again. I told you I'm very simple. I do my 2 months of bank statements and off I go. But there's a thing called You Need a Budget, YNAB, and it basically pulls in all the data and essentially does that budgeting piece for you. So whatever you need to do, get your budgets pulled together first, and then it's going to give you the answer to many questions that are going to be on the application anyway. So minimally, you get yourself a nice budget update to see where you're at, and then it actually will help you to complete the forms. The next thing I want you to do is make sure you have your tax returns in front of you. So last year's tax returns, which would be your 2023s, a lot of the questions are going to be things like, what was your adjusted gross income, or what was your box number 1 W-2 earnings? Now, I look at taxes every day, and if you were to ask me what I make, I know in my mind what my earnings are. But if you ask me what I paid in federal taxes last year, I'm probably not going to be able to just know what that number is. Or if you'd say, what was your adjusted gross income last year? You're probably not going to know that off the top of your head. So having the tax returns from last year on the table with you as you're filling out the form will help you to get a good estimate. So we're basically looking for your best estimates. So 2023, have those tax returns in front of you to kind of help you fill out the form. So you've got your budget information, which is very much about expenses. And then you've got your tax return data, which is very much about income and taxes paid and things like that. For those of you that have had any major changes from 2023 to 2024, if you're a W-2 employee, having that paycheck stub in front of you, it is now November. Many of you, that is almost the equivalent of your W-2 at this point. So having that paycheck stub in front of you, particularly if a lot of things have changed, and when you ask questions about pre-tax things like what are you putting into retirement, things like that, you'll find a lot of that information on your paycheck stub. And then if you're filling this out in January or February, mostly in February timeframe, if you're a new family, you might actually have your W-2s for 2024. That might be useful information to have in front of you as well. If you own businesses, you want to make sure you have your profit and loss statements and the K-1s and your business taxes in front of you, because there's going to be some questions around your business. So making sure you gather those documents now. What you don't want to do is log in, set up shop, and say, all right, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to start filling out the form and say, hey, hey, honey, can you grab me this form? Oh, well, that's at the storage unit. We put those taxes away a year ago. Oh, it's in an old email address. I don't have access to that. Do that hard lift now. Get all the documents in front of you so that you're sitting down, you have a sense of calm about it, you got everything in front of you, and you should be able to kind of complete however many forms you need to complete. If it's one system or two, you have everything there in front of you, and then you can kind of go through the process. Again, if you're filling this out for more than one school, making sure all those schools are listed and making sure you're sending the application to the right schools. If you are someone that gets your taxes done by an accountant, typically they will send you password protected tax documents via email. That is problematic because once you go to upload those to a financial aid platform, if you're asked to upload taxes, the password goes back on again and the system can't open your taxes. They need the taxes uploaded and to be open. So if you know that your tax returns are password protected, you need to reach out to your accountant now and get copies of unprotected versions of your tax returns. And again, if you're filling out, there's other systems like Clarity that they'll pull the tax documents directly in from the IRS. But for some reason, if they're not able to pull them, they're still going to need you to upload the taxes directly. So just make sure you have a copy at the ready, even if you're filling out Clarity, which pulls the taxes in directly. If you are using a system, if you're using Clarity and you filed extension through October, which was just finished, October 15th was the deadline for those late filers, your tax transcript is what's getting pulled in from the IRS to the Clarity application. And it takes the IRS between 5 and 7 weeks to do that. So if you have just filed your extended 2023 taxes, you might want to wait maybe 1 or 2 more weeks before completing the form, and then it should be able to pull those tax transcripts in for you. So just know that that is and most people have filed their 2023s at this point, but just something to be aware of. So here's your timeline. We already talked about doing the budget. Get that budget piece out of the way. And then, we are in it, right? It is full on fall, full on pumpkin spice season. Applications are going to be due for most returning families in the next month or so for financial aid. So if you're a returning family, you're probably already got a notification saying, hey, the deadline's December 15th, November 20th, whatever the date is. So if you're a returning family, you're probably already getting ready to fill out these forms. But if you're a new family, looking at the deadline dates, and while there's no gold star for getting it done early, get this thing out of the way, and then you can focus on all the things you need to do for admissions, getting your interviews done, getting the transcripts pulled over for your for admissions, doing all those pieces of the puzzle. Get that out of the, getting the financial aid application out of the way just takes it off your plate. I wouldn't recommend waiting to the last minute or 1 week before the deadline to get those things in, because something might come up that you need to ask the school questions about. They're going to be super busy in December and January. So doing it early just will get it out of the way and get it off your plate. By late winter, most of the schools are going to be doing the returning kiddos first, and so they'll get their grants recorded, and re-enrollment contracts go out in the winter. And then by, the deadlines, I actually put it on here for LAIS. I pulled it off the LAIS website for grades K-12. The notifications for new families, whether they got admission to the school, is March 14th. And most schools will send you your grants along with your award notification. So you should get your admission notification, and on there, it'll tell you what your grant is for that school. Then there are also, there's going to be a reply date of when you need to reply back. Yes, I'm going to your school, and typically a deposit happens at that time. So all of that happens in the very early in March. And then by late spring, you want to make sure you're always kind of keeping engaged with the financial aid process to make sure that the school has all of the documents that you've required. So they may even make an award recommendation, but you still need to do some more documentation. So just make sure you've got everything in there that they're requiring, and then the season closes out. One critical thing that I've got to mention with y'all is I have my sort of what I call the 20% off coupon email. I love getting 20% off coupons, but I hate giving a good email address because then they email me 10,000 times a day. So I use basically a junk email for those 20% off coupons. Do not use your junk email to fill out your financial aid application. Use an email address that you have ready access to, because there's a two-way communication happening. So either it's the financial aid platform saying, hey, just so you know, you upload a password protected document, we can't open it, we need you to go back in and do that. If schools all of a sudden are trying to communicate with you through these email addresses and you're not getting those notifications because it's not something you check, the school's going to think you're just ghosting them, and they're like, well, I guess they didn't want to go through the process or didn't want to finish it. So make sure you're keeping that partnership alive and making sure you're communicating and keeping engaged with the application process. So be always on the lookout for application notifications that come from the school and the financial aid platform. By the end of spring, you'll have decided what school you're going to go to. You'll be starting to set up your payment plans. That way my husband and I make it work. We've always done a tuition payment plan. It makes it, as for business owners, it makes it our cash flow. It helps with cash flow doing a 10-month plan. So you set up your plans, and usually in late spring, you're going to start making payments for the next academic year. Depending on the school, they have different dates when those start. And then by next fall, rinse and repeat. And this is the process that you're going to follow for the next, 12 to 14 years, or 16 years, because once you had your kids head off to college, you'll be doing that same process. So the clearness or the clarity that I want, I know Clarity is also a financial aid application name, so that can be a little confusing. I want you to have a clearness about what are the critical pieces that we're looking at. It sort of feels like, you fill out this form and it goes into this anonymous of how do we even come up with the numbers that we come up with. And there is a lot that goes into it. This is a pretty extensive algorithm. All of them are. There's some of them have a 52-page computation manual attached to them. The most critical pieces, and again, this is where the partnership comes into play. We are asking you to fill out a form in November, December, January, based on what is happening that year. We're looking at tax returns from 2023, which is essentially last year, to determine what you can pay next year, right? That is essentially 3 years worth of variability. And in the environment that we've been living in, there is lots of folks, particularly if you were in real estate in Los Angeles or during the strikes that happened with the entertainment industry, there was a lot of variability that maybe in 2022 you were doing fabulous in real estate, and in 2023 it was like shut down. 2024, not great. Interest rates start to drop, and so things have gotten a little bit better for you, but they're not perfect, and they're certainly not what they were in 2022. We're looking at multi-years worth of income. So the more information you can share during this process helps the schools to understand where you are at and try to meet you where you are at this time. This is also why we have you do this each year, because things change. So the most critical part I want you to focus on, and what schools focus on, you're paying us from your income. You're not paying us from your home equity. You're not paying us from your retirement, certainly. You're essentially paying us from the income coming in your house minus the expenses that go out of your house that you have no control over, right? We've got housing, clothing, food, insurance, taxes, property taxes, like all of these things that you have really, that is just baked into your life. Those come out, and then we have what's called discretionary income. What we're looking at is we want to make sure we're saying this family can pay X amount of dollars, not just for this year, but this is their typical average normal income, typical average normal expenses, and they can likely make these types of payments for the next X amount of years. Tuition goes up every year, so you can expect that you're going to pay a little bit more every year, just like everything else in life. So you need to prepare for that. But what we're not saying is 1 year we're going to say you can pay 5,000, the next year it's going to be 20, and then the third year it's going to be 18. We want to be consistent, and we want you to be consistent in what you can plan for your own budgets. So the more information you can share on what's going on in your financial life is going to be critically important for us as we do our assessments. This is most important for new families because we really have no context. We don't know you. We don't know that grandma and grandpa just moved in. We don't know that mom and dad are getting divorced. These are things we don't know because we're looking at tax data and an application. So the more you can share helps us to do a better job of assessment. So most important is the information around income. The second most important piece is we're looking at assets. What do you own? What do you owe? So we're looking at, your primary residence. Do you have any secondary residence? Do you have any rental properties? Do you have any business assets? Do you have any student loan debt like us? I'll have student loan debt till I'm dead and gone. We're looking at those pieces. What do you have in savings and in checking and stuff? Nobody is suggesting that you have to liquidate your savings account to pay for your kids' education. If we say to do that, what are we going to do in the next year when all that money is now gone? We want this to be actionable and repeatable each and every year. So nobody is asking you in 1 year to liquidate all of your assets to be able to pay for your kids' education. We are looking at thousands of applications and trying to come up with a fair and equitable way to support as many families as possible with a pretty limited budget. The next piece that's really important is family members. How many people live in the household? Are you a family of 4, a family of 5? Do mom and dad live in the house? Do grandma and grandpa live in the house? And so that may or may not show up on your taxes. You might not be claiming them as dependents, but they live in your household. So put them in your household in the application. If you are caring for grandma and grandpa, but they live independently, in a down the street or in another state, there is always a section about elder care, caring for elderly parents. Many of us are in what we call the sandwich generation. We have elderly parents that we're caring for, and we're also trying to care for our children. So make sure you're doing that budget piece. How much are you sending to grandma and grandpa every month? So a family of 4 that has, not a lot going on might be asked to pay $1 amount, and a family of 4 that's got other expenses that, related to elder care or what have you, it could be asked to pay something different. But we only know what you tell us. So it's just really important that you take your time with these questions. You fill them out thoroughly and as best you can. And that'll give us a clear sense about what your financial story is.
Alyssa, can I just jump in? There's a few questions that have popped up that this
Yeah,
might be a good time to answer. So
sure.
there are a few questions around um, are there specific numbers that schools use? So when they are thinking about like how much do you spend on groceries per month, for example? And should families try to match to a specific number or use that as like guardrails?
You give us what is real for you. If
Right.
what we use and what's real for you, if you're saying you spend $5,000 a month on groceries because you shop at Whole Foods every day, that's what you're spending. We protect for housing, clothing, food, insurance, all based on averages for Los Angeles. So we apply cost of living adjustments for Los Angeles, which is very expensive for housing. It's very expensive. Well, it's very expensive for all the things, right? Gas, everything is very expensive. You tell us what is your actual expenses, your best estimates. We don't want you trying to, like either manage down or manage up. Just tell us what's real for you. Nobody's judging. It's just whatever's real for you is real for you. What we protect for those expenses might be not exactly what you're spending. It might be a little bit less, and it might be even more potentially. But it's based on we want you to tell us what's real for your exact family. So yeah, no, but there's always variability about what people spend on different expenses, but we always apply a cost of goods in our area especially for Los Angeles, to make sure we're protecting enough what's reasonable for people to be spending on those expenses.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And one other question is you're getting into the tax forms. People had questions about privacy related to like social security numbers and who sees what information.
That's a great question. So first about security, I would go to every financial aid platform's website. They all have, all sorts of things around data security and compliance. They're dealing with like personal identifying information. Is it PII? So they have to be compliant for whatever is regarding, cyber, all of those things. Like SSS, for example, is on their underlying platform is Salesforce, which has SOX compliance and government compliance. So you're applying in a safe, protected environment. As far as data privacy goes, that's all protected and remains in there. Who has access to see the data is the school, the person that's reviewing the files at the school. And so they're essentially the ones that are reviewing it. It typically is either the head of school, the committee would be the head of school typically, or and the CFO of the school, and maybe an admissions director of director of enrollment management, and maybe the financial aid auditor if they have an auditing company that does it. But those would be the folks that have access to the data. Nobody is downloading people's tax returns. And in fact, I'm not even sure that nobody's looking at Social Security numbers, because we're not pulling credit. There's no credit being pulled here. It's just simply looking at tax data. To ensure higher security, you should always be redacting. If you're asked to upload, yeah, if you're using a system that you're uploading the tax return, not the tax transcript, but if you're uploading the tax return, you should be redacting your social security numbers and your bank account information, because those typically fall on a tax return. That would be an additional layer of security that you could put on there. With the tax transcript, if you're using a system like Clarity, where they're actually pulling it directly from the IRS, which is a direct pull, the Social Security numbers, it's only the last four that are seen. So nobody's full Social Security numbers are being exposed there. But everybody's got data security, like all their compliance stuff is all listed on the financial aid platforms websites. And all of the schools do their work in the financial aid. So they're logging into the financial aid platform to do their work. So that data is kind of being held within the same space. Nobody's kind of exporting it and printing off and like keeping it in. Back in the day, they used to have physical files. That's not a thing anymore. Everything's sort of held in the cloud at this point. But that's a good question, because that's, I mean, we've been, on average, just to give for context, most systems are reviewing, maybe 100 to 200,000 applications. And so I know even, just last year, Fax, I think, processed 450, 400,000 applications. I have not, in all my years, I've been doing this for 25 years, I have not had any instances of a data breach or a situation where data was there was any breach of data. So it's been something that has been very well protected. But do your due diligence, look on the websites, go for their data security section, which will talk about their specific platforms, data security, and what they have related to cyber security, all that stuff. But that's a great question. The tax forms. So what I want you to gather, and like this is probably more information than you ever wanted to know. So we're about to dive into a little tax lesson here for a couple of seconds. But if, depending on how your family is configured, if you're a W-2, kind of a classic W-2 employee, you work for an organization, or you yourself own a company, but you are also a W-2 employee of your company, you want to make sure if you are asked to upload your taxes, you want to make sure you're uploading all of the tax return, because there is data that lives below the first page of your tax return that is going to be important for the schools to see. So when we ask you for your Form 1040, we're not asking you for just to upload, page 1. We need the full tax return. So I wanted you to know what you might have if you have this tax return. So the Form 1040 is your federal tax return. You're a W-2 employee. We want to make sure you have all of your W-2. So you might work for more than one company. You might have more than one W-2, or your spouse. You want to make sure you're uploading all of the W-2s so that all of the W-2 earnings from that box 1 match what's listed on the tax return. On that first page, you'll see total wages from W-2 earnings. So that's what the schools are looking at too, to make sure that all of your W-2 data matches. If you own a business, if you get alimony, if you had unemployment this past year, all of that information, you're going to see that there'll be a Schedule 1. Well, if you have a Schedule 1, it's likely that you fall into maybe one of these 3 categories. If you might have a business, we want to make sure that if you have a business that's called a Schedule C business, that's usually for sole proprietors, you want to make sure you're attaching the Schedule C. If you have multiple businesses, we need all of the Schedule Cs. You might have more than one. If you own a business, a more complex business that's an S corp or a partnership, if you have any trusts or estate stuff, and you have any rental properties, if you're someone that gets royalties from, maybe you're a songwriter and you get royalties, you will have what's called a Schedule E. Make sure you upload as many Schedule E's as you have. It is much simpler just to upload the whole entire thing and let us deal with all the schedules, but just make sure you don't forget these. These are really important documents, because we don't get them as file auditors. We're going to be reaching out to you and say, oh, hey, we're missing the Schedule E for this business or that business or what have you. And then if you do own businesses, we will need your so the 1040 is your personal return. We need your corporate return for all your businesses. So that would be if you own an S corp, it's called an 1120S. And if you own a partnership or you're part of a partnership, it's called a 1065. And we'll be looking for the Schedule K1s for those. You don't need to remember all of this. Just know that as you're going through this, these are the kind of common forms that are going to be requested from you. I just wanted to give you this is the areas that are of most importance. So when you're going to filling out these forms, oftentimes the system will say, what did you earn in wages and tips on box 1? So this is what a classic W-2 looks like. And it's usually box 1 is right here. So you'll be able to see that right here. If it asks you about, do you do dependent care? Do you do pre-tax payments to retirement? That's all going to live on box number 12, and it'll have the different codes here. So just kind of they have the same information, I promise you, on the financial aid application, the little think bubbles. It'll tell you, go to this form, this section. But I just want you to have an abundance of information as you're filling out these forms. This is what a classic tax return looks like. And are we recording this, Kate, so folks can come back to it?
Yes, it's being recorded, and
okay.
I think eventually will be shared out, I believe, on the LAS platform, but
Okay, cool.
yeah.
All right, because there's a lot of things on here. Again, this is not meant for me to do a deep dive into how to read a tax return, because we could spend a whole 5 hours on doing that. But just to help you kind of know where to find things and the schedule. So when you come back to this, you can take a screenshot of it now, but just if you come back to it, it'll let you know where to look for the information. Because like if it asks questions about other taxable income, you're like, I'm not sure if I have other taxable. What is other taxable income? I'm not an accountant. These are some of the areas that you're going to be wanting to look for. So just again, take your time with this stuff. This is that Schedule 1 I was talking about. There's more information on here that's important for us to know. Did you have unemployment last year? What was happening? Were there any changes to that stuff? So where does that live on your tax return? So we wanted to give you just a bit more information. So as you're filling out these forms, it won't be the first time you're ever hearing about, did you have rental or royalties or business from partnership? The really important thing to note, and I talked about it earlier, but if something has changed, if it's very different, instead of using last year's complete tax return, use it as an estimate for taxes and some of those types of things. But looking at your last paycheck stub for estimating income is going to be really helpful. And then letting the school know via there's a section at the end that sort of says like, okay, give us any additional information that we need to know, and say, hey, the perfect example is I've been in real estate. It's been kind of a bad situation. Here's where I'm at. This is what the story is, and this is where I expect it to go. Giving us that information and using this for your estimates on the Clarity application and the Facts application and on SSS, and asking you, do you expect anything to be different? And so that would be your opportunity to say, yes, and it is, and here's what's changed. Making sure you have your business, your profit and loss statement becomes really helpful because it'll get you answers to, what were your gross revenues? What are your business assets? You might not know that off the top of your head, but it'll live on both your profit and loss statement. You'll have your income and expense piece. And then on the balance sheet, it's going to have all the asset and liabilities piece. The last kind of big thing here is the traffic jam. Big things you need to pay attention to. If you have unusual situations, itemize them out, let the school know, leave good notes. That's probably the most critical thing. Don't just say I had an unusual expense of $15,000 and don't tell us what it is. We don't know if that was like a trip to the Bahamas or if you had a funeral that you had to attend or you're getting divorced and it's legal fees. Giving us more information is always going to be better. If you are remarried, regardless of who is financially supporting the child in the household, we need both of them on the application. We are going to see them on your taxes, and if you fill out the form and you don't list your new spouse, and we see that this is a tax return that's married filing jointly, we're going to be reaching out saying, hey, we need that other parent on the application. If you are kind of separated and divorced, you will never have any crossing over of data. If that's the concern, is that your spouse will then be listed, someone will be able to look at it. No, we want parent A, we want parent B of that child. But if they are both remarried, we want their spousal information as well, because that's the households that we're assessing. You will never see their information. They will never see your information. It's done on the back end that we pull the application together for the student. Using your taxes as a guide, critically important, makes this an easier process. The question that we kind of asked in the beginning, what do you truly think you can afford to pay? Don't be unrealistic. Don't offer more than you think you can afford to pay because somehow you think that will get you into a school. Don't do that. If you offer a lot more, we don't know that grandma and grandpa aren't also paying for it. And so we're like, okay, well, the math says you can afford to pay $2,000. But if grandma and grandpa are covering it and you're offering to pay 30 and there's no way you could possibly come up with that, we're not going to know that you're just kind of throwing a number out there. And we will take that offer. And then when we say to you, okay, time to pay 30, you're like, well, just kidding. I didn't really mean that. So be very conscious of that question and say, we want you to do the heavy lift, do your budgets, get a number, and come up with what you think is reasonable for your family. Don't put don't put zero, because everybody needs to have some skin in the game here as best you can. And that might be very low for your family because you're a high need family. That's absolutely appropriate. But giving something is something. Don't put the full tuition. There is always a handful of families that put the full tuition as what they can afford to pay, because clearly you would not go through this effort and all of this extra effort if you could pay full price. You're not going to put in you wouldn't be filling out this form to begin with. That question is very close to what is the tuition for the school. And so some people, for whatever reason, flip the question for what is the tuition and what can you afford to pay towards tuition. So pay attention to the questions related to affordability. And if you own a business, you just need to be very kind of take it slowly. It's going to take a bit more time because business owners are more complex. If you are separated and divorced, and or whatever, if you're separated and you have just moved into different households, don't try to jam it onto one application. We want you to complete the forms separately. You will both be uploading likely a tax return that is the same one because you were married filing jointly in 2023. Now you are living in separate households. That's the only way the school is going to be able to account for 2 households worth of expenses. So make sure you don't try to apply on one application. Even if you're amicable, we need you to apply separately. If you are divorced, we absolutely want, you're going to want to be applying separately. And that's something that you're going to be doing. You each will fill out your form. What is critically important here, If you are a parent that wants your child to go in independent school and the other parent that you are divorced from, or the other parent of this child says, well, I don't want to fill out the form, I don't want to do it, or I don't care about this process, you need to be reaching out to the school or schools ASAP to say, what do I need to do? Parent B is non-compliant, they won't participate in this process, because we need both of them on the form to be able to do it. And so you need to reach out to the schools early. There are other, in very limited circumstances, there are opportunities to get a parent B waiver or to do some other thing, and maybe they can reach out to the other parent for you. Don't wait till after the deadline is passed and then say, oh, by the way, I can't get parent B to fill out the form. You want to make sure you're really on top of that. Way that causes the most amount of hassle and grief for you as a family. So get on top of that early if you're not having compliance with the other parent. So do that effort early on. This is always a common question. What is the expectation around working parents, and what if I'm a stay-at-home parent? This is the really important piece. For if you are the financially was sort of built out of this premise that says, this is the tuition for the school. Parents do everything that they can do to come up with the tuition. They reach out to grandma and grandpa potentially if they have access to that. They pool all the resources. We come to the table, we can afford to pay X amount of dollars, but the tuition is this many dollars, and we can't fill that gap. We've done all of we've looked at all the places, we've looked under the couches. This is all the money we can contribute. And then it's on the school to say, can we fill that gap for this parent, for many parents? And the expectation is that if you are capable and you could work and bring in money to be able to pay the tuition, you should do that first, and then you come with whatever's left over. If you choose to be a stay-at-home parent, that's okay. That's the choice that you've made. But we are likely to add income to that non-working spouse, because the point is that we want everybody to be treated fairly and equitably. And everybody kind of would like to be potentially a stay-at-home parent, but we just can't make that work. And so we want to be fair and equitable to all the parents in the program. There are exceptions to that, though. Clearly, what are the exceptions? And I want you to be, if you fall into one of these categories, if we don't know it, we don't know it, and then we're going to inadvertently add income and assume that you are a stay-at-home parent. If you are a stay-at-home parent because you are caring for an elderly parent or a disabled child, then we need to know about that. That is the job that you've chosen, and that's the job that you have, and there would never be a situation. That's an exception to adding income. If you have just had a child and you are, sometimes it's cheaper to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom while the child is lower than school age, and then you go back to work potentially once the child goes off to school. If you yourself are unable to work, then letting us know that you are not able to work through disability or what have you, letting us know that then we get an understanding of why you're not working, and then we can put that exception in. And again, we don't know what we don't know. So being open and sharing with us, so we're understanding what the state of affairs are and how your family is configured. And nobody is suggesting you can't be a stay-at-home parent, but we want to apply minimums so that everybody is treated kind of fairly and equitably. If you are someone that has just lost a job, you are not a stay-at-home parent, you are an unemployed worker. And so in that instance, you let us know that you just lost a job, and then we can work around, what were you making previously? How long have you been unemployed? What are we thinking is your trajectory here? And so it's a much different conversation than choosing to be a stay-at-home parent is something different. And then yes, unfortunately, you do have to apply each and every year. All right, so I want to make sure I leave time for questions, but before we get to questions, I just want to again reiterate the amount of time and effort that you put into this, to the program, to filling out the admissions, to going on the interviews, doing all this hard work. I want to thank you for your efforts on that. I want to thank you on behalf of your children, because this, no matter what, is a sacrifice for parents. It's something you're working towards and you're working with the schools on. And so I want to thank you, because again, I don't know when my kids are going to thank me, but I know that they will. And the research also suggests that these kids are better for what you've done. You are investing in their now and you're investing in their future. And I just so appreciate all the efforts that that you put forth. And I can tell you from a parent's perspective, it was the best investment we ever made. And I so appreciate that our kids have been able to have an experience that I didn't have. I was a public school kid from Boston, but It's really just an amazing opportunity, and I do wish you all the best of luck. So if you do have to hop off, feel free to do that. But I'm here to answer questions. So let me stop sharing my screen. Is there any other things you wanted to share with the team, with everybody here, Kate? Or should we just hop
I
to
thought, no,
questions?
I thought it was so helpful. And I was going through, I've been doing this for 13 years on the admission side. And I feel like I learned some things or thought about it in a different way from today. So I really appreciate all your insights.
Yeah,
One thing that I think comes up a lot often is that a family will apply to, let's say, like 3 to 5 schools, and they'll get 3 to 5 completely different awards. And that's, curious. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what that looks like and
yeah.
means.
Yep, and so to me, it comes back to independent schools have different budgets. Some schools are deeply funded by financially, like they have endowments, so they can actually give out more money than other schools can. And it also depends on which, like if they've got their, if they can only give out so much financial aid, they can't be as generous for the cost of living of Los Angeles. Or some schools say, actually, we don't add income for non-working spouses, and another school does add income for non-working spouses, and then it sort of would give a different number, right? This is all a mathematical equation, a lot of it. Some schools look at children in just high school as children in tuition charging schools. Some schools look at children in high school and in college. Unfortunately, now colleges don't do that, which really upsets me. They don't care about the fact that college age kids might have siblings in private high school. They used to account for that in the FAFSA, and they would give you better awards. Unfortunately, that has gone away. But most independent schools will include number of children in tuition charging schools to include the kids in college. So if a school doesn't account for that, then it's essentially double, right? So there are different how schools set their policies can be very different depending on what this. So you might get different offers from different schools, and kind of in some ways it just depends on how well the school is funded, how much financial aid. Oftentimes it can be related to tuition. Higher tuition schools might have better finance, better funding, and so they have more wiggle room to offer more aid potentially. And then schools that are maybe faith based, where they're not getting as much support from, they're keeping the tuition very low, but that doesn't there's not a lot of operating money left over to give out a lot of financial aid, and so it really just depends on the school.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you're saying too about the different thresholds, right? Like every school is
Yeah,
going to kind of assess what it means, because what it means to live in the neighborhood around one particular school and what that,
very different.
rent might be, or
Yeah,
mortgages, housing costs might be very different 20
yeah,
miles, down the road. So I think it really does make a big difference.
yeah.
We do have a number of other questions here. I'm good to stay on a few minutes more. I hopefully you are too. I don't know if you want to quickly look at these. The money that your total amount of tuition that you can afford, that's usually for the year, not the month. I feel like that's when we can answer when they're asking that question. Yeah,
Yep.
that's a great one. Thinking about the role of a 529, and that, and what that means if you're setting aside money for your child in one of those savings accounts, educational savings accounts. Oftentimes it's thought of for college, but
That's
now you
right.
can
Yeah.
use them for elementary, middle, and high school.
Yeah, yeah. And in California, it's not without some implications. I think there's this assumption that you could just use it and there's no tax implications in California, because now I'm like, yeah, wait, this is just a California group. Because I
Right.
present to other states. In California, there are some tax implications of actioning on that. So just, reach out to your tax advisor on that.
Mhm.
But how do 529 plans impact the calculation? They're all lumped in as part of your asset allocation stuff. And most schools, if we're kind of talking through that kind of complexity, they're looking at that you can't contribute 50,000. If you have $50,000 in a 529 plan, you can't contribute $50,000. The max you could do is 10. And so nobody's sort of suggesting that you liquidate what is originally built. That was always built for college. It was only in the last, I think it was in 2018 tax reform, that all of a sudden it came to be available for K-12. And so we look at it, but it's not really a main factor. Nobody would suggest we want you to liquidate. We do want families to be saving for
Right.
retirement, because guess what? Those kids are not covering your retirement. In fact, if
Uh,
anything else, they're coming back home.
right. And
Um,
that's same for, right, true for not just for the retirement, but the 529 for the, yeah, the college. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So I think that is um the stay at home, the income for the stay at home parent, that's really going to vary by school and what the school's philosophy is around assigning that income.
Yeah, and it's pretty
Right.
I mean, most schools do a typical minimum wage times, a standard 1 year. That's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty baseline that most schools, that's mostly what we recommend is we keep it static. So most schools is like 35,000 or 40, whatever it is for your area.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty standard recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one question that's a good one is about single parents. What if I'm a single parent and the other parent is like not even in the child's life, or maybe you had a
Mm-hmm.
child like on your own without a parent B? This is where you need to talk to the schools because we just need to, the schools need to be under an understanding of what's where you're at. And so there are instances where we will waive the requirement for the parent B under circumstances, but you need to be in correspondence. If they've never been in the child's life, they'll basically have you fill out a form to that respect and say, yeah, no, never been in the child's life, and you essentially sign that that's true and complete. Now, if that parent starts showing up to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, like, wait, who is this person we didn't know existed? That's, you got to be, clear about what's the circumstances around it. But yeah, make sure you talk to the schools about what's happening in your household.
And I think that it can feel so tricky for the parent in that situation, but for schools, that's something that we have those conversations around. So it's really, don't feel shy or embarrassed about that. Everyone's situation is unique and would be approached in that way.
Yep.
Um,
This
the
is the
question,
classic question. Does applying for financial aid affect admissions? You as the admissions person, I will tell you that because it,
yeah, I mean, I think every school is going to look at it differently. And every school is going to have its own philosophy around what that means. I always suggest, and I feel like the rule of thumb and what you said too, is if you are a family who you think you're going to benefit from financial aid, and that's important for you, that you should apply for it.
absolutely.
And you absolutely should. You don't qualify based off of a school, you could still possibly get an acceptance, but without an award. That's also an
Right.
option as well.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's certainly something that comes up. So I always feel like if it's even a question in your mind, go ahead, apply for it.
Yeah.
I think it's almost harder if you don't apply for it. It's such a stretch. And then 2 years in, you find yourself in a situation of really needing to apply for tuition assistance. And the school's already allocated all their funds. And if there hasn't been a substantial change to your family's financial circumstances, that's really hard because it's school who's fallen in love with this family and this child,
Right.
and your family has become such an important part of the school, and have your people there. That's just a tricky situation, and so you don't want to find yourself in that spot 2 to 3 years down the line,
Yeah.
um, of really needing that. So I really just do it if that's going to help you. I think all schools, nobody is looking to fund anybody's yacht or exotic car
Right.
collection,
Sure.
you know, but
Yeah.
I loved what you said too, because it's so true. You should still live your life. You need to go on that summer vacation to visit grandma
Absolutely.
in,
Yeah.
Connecticut or whatever it is. You need to
Yeah.
have those family experiences and have, your date night. Like, we do not want to take away date night.
Right.
Um,
No, no. Yeah. It's just, it's all about
yeah,
being reasonable and fair. And
right,
nobody's,
right.
and the big thing about the admissions thing, and I struggle because I work with schools and their budgets. And if you come to the school 2 years later and say, like, oh, just kidding, now I need the money, I've exhausted all my resources, you are not baked into the budget. And the
Yeah,
school
yeah,
does not have a lot of extra money to kind of, they're there for your emergency needs. If you are an existing school, a existing parent, and something happens, that school is there for you. That's exactly what they're there for. But the minute people that needed it didn't take it, then they start taking emergency funds. Then there's just, the budgets are so limited, that they really can't have a ton of people. And there are some schools, they bake it right into their contracts. You come in as a full pay family, you remain a full pay family, and you have to show proof
yep,
of drop of earnings of 20 or 30%.
yep.
And that can be devastating, in fact. Yeah.
One thing
Um,
too that does come up is this idea that, let's say you get an award, you get an acceptance, you get that award, but it's not quite enough and you need that extra little bit. It is fully appropriate to go to that school and say, look, we absolutely love you. We would love to do this. Here's where we're at. We really need this amount of money to make this possible. Is that something that you can do? I would
yeah.
suggest doing that. What I would not do is, kind of pit schools against each other. Like, so and so offered me this much, and can you match that? Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not that's not what this is about. But this is about, if there's that extra $1,000 or $2,000 will make a big difference for your family to be able to attend the school. That's important for the school to know. And can take that, uh, take an opportunity to ask and to check in.
Yeah, I mean, it's an appeal process. So that would be
Yes.
something, yeah, there is an appeal process. If you feel like what is not reasonable or you couldn't come up with it or something has since changed, like, you're filling these things out in December, January, and you're getting your award in March, and in February you lost your job, things have changed now, right? So
Yeah.
you really, when you do an appeal, it's usually a process that you would fill out a form, explain why the amount that you've been awarded is not reflective of what you've done your budgets, you've done all your things, and you're likely going to be asked to submit like more current data to kind of
Mhm.
substantiate your request. Um, and using giving more updated data could be what the school needed, or we didn't realize that you just lost your job or whatever. The
Yeah.
assumption is the school did the right kind of mathematical equation and then letting them know. But most schools, there is a formal appeal process. They would fill out a form, they'd submit some new documents potentially. But yeah, absolutely. If you can't make it work and that's the school you want to go to, letting them know this is what I've got and this is why I can't make it work, and they can help you kind of do that piece.
Yeah.
Um, let's
Uh,
see. Oh, someone had an interesting question about what schools. Do you know which schools are financially blind? I don't. There are probably very few schools in the country that they have to know at some point who needs financial aid. But admissions runs as a separate operation of financial aid. So
mm,
when you fill it, that's why I said get the financial aid thing out of the way, because admissions people have so much other work that they're doing has nothing to do with financial aid. So the application for admission, anybody on the admission committee or doing your admission work don't know that you are like, that's not part of the gig. They're all looking at the admissibility. Are you a mission appropriate kid? Can are you a right fit? All of those things happen first. Then, okay, here are all of our admissible kids. Then they're looking at the who needs financial aid and how to kind of, and who needs third grade. What do we need here, 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 here? They are very much a separate process. Where they intersect is as you come into the financial side of things. Okay, now we ready to do awarding and stuff. And so, the financially blind, there's like a handful of schools in the country that don't ever, like, there's never a knowledge between those two things. And they're schools that have many hundreds of $1 million of endowed monies, which there are few and far between. And again, the admissions process is happening mutually exclusive of your financial aid. So you're either going to get in or you're not going to get in, and then they're looking at that financial piece to see where they can match you. Um, all right, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. If you got to get back to the, like I do, homework and all the other pieces of the puzzle that we do with at night. Um,
yeah.
Let me see if there's anything else that
Uh,
wasn't.
2020, yes, you're giving your 2023 taxes, 2024 taxes. Usually schools oftentimes will ask families to submit them in April or May
Yeah, at the tax deadline. Yeah,
after
yeah,
a deadline. And if you, and there's oftentimes a question, I think usually a question on the application form, the financial aid application form is, what is your anticipated, um, income for 2024? And so even if you haven't done your tax return, I know there's a question about, if they're anticipating a big change compared to 2023, you can
yeah.
give kind of like your best guess about what it's going to be and what it's going to look like.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
and now we're sort of coming, and the good news is applying now, like what happened in 2024. Everybody's pretty, I mean, shockingly, we're in November. It went from like August to November in a blink. Most of us are pretty kind of near the end of the calendar year, so we know kind of what 2024 is going to look like. So,
Mhm.
and at the end of the application, there is this section called like other considerations. So if grandma and grandpa are moving into the house in January, right? Like there's no evidence of that anywhere. It's not on your taxes. It's not what happened in 2024, but it is happening in 2025. That would be something relevant to share in the application at the end, to just say, there is going to be a change and it's going to happen before I'm actually going to start paying the school, and letting us know what that looks like. So if you can look forward, I mean, no, if you are worried about losing your job, we can't do anything about worrying. But if you do lose your job, we can certainly do some adjustments to calculations then. But giving us what things that are coming down the pipe. And again, this is why we do this every year. So next year you might have more need because there's been a change of circuit, or you're pregnant now. Don't put the baby yet, but next year then you're going to have a family of 4 versus a family of 3, and like things change over time. And that we fully expect that with families that are dealing with kids 0 to 17, or whatever. Um,
Right.
okay,
And
great.
there,
Well,
There's that one last question there. If you're self-employed but didn't make any income, do you need to include that too? Do you
If,
see that
sorry,
one?
once again, if you're
It
what?
says, if you are self-employed but didn't make any income, do you need to include that too?
Well, we would see it on your taxes.
Right.
So,
You should be
uh,
submitting taxes anyways, right?
yeah, yeah, we would get that anyway. But if it was that like in 2023 you were doing fabulous and in 2024 it was like it all went down,
Mm.
then we would need that. Now, obviously, if you're paying all your bills and you have a mortgage, there's income coming from somewhere. So if you take a draw, but you took a like what you pay in taxes and what you take home when you're a business owner could be very, kind of two very different things, right? And so if you're filling out the form, if you say you have zero income, but you have a $5,000 a month mortgage, you got to explain that. Like you got to be clear about like, oh, well, I do take a draw, but I basically draw down to no profit or whatever it might be. But if in truly, in fact, this one person in the household is not earning any income, but they're self-employed, they didn't earn anything this year. Real estate, again, I don't want to keep harping on that, but that was the biggest thing we saw this year is real estate was very, very
Mm.
deeply impacted. That it could be that you didn't only sold one home or whatever it might be, letting the team know that and then say this is where, and you might have had to go into credit card debt, you might have had to go,
Yeah.
who knows what you had to do to survive. Letting the school know that is really important. That's sort of that all part of that. What's the financial story of who you are is really important.
Well, Alyssa, I am so grateful for your time, and I feel like we could just keep chatting and going over this all night long because there's so many good questions coming through. But I just wanted to say a very special thank you to you on behalf of all of us at the LAIS and 60 plus schools and all these families who joined us here tonight. This has just been an incredibly helpful evening for all of us. So I wish you a good evening, and thank you to everyone who came, and a very special thank you to Hadley Kia, who is behind the scenes managing everything. We really appreciate you. This recording is going to be available eventually on the LAIS website, and you're welcome to reach out to me or to LAIS through our website if you do have any questions about accessing it.